I'm Angela Yore.
And I'm Lynda Clarke, and welcome to Why We Lead, the podcast that delves into the stories and insights of impactful leaders
and unsung heroes shaping the fintech world and beyond.
We're delighted today to have Tony Craddock, the Director General of the Payments Association, with us today. Welcome, Tony. How are you?
I'm really well. Great to be here.
Hi, Tony. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
So, Tony is an enthusiastic leader of the world's most influential trade association in payments. And that I can vouch for that. That's absolutely true. He's a lively public speaker and an avid networker. So much so that these days, government's ears are on what the Payments Association is saying. And we've also, the Payments Association has been in Reuters, Bloomberg and the FT, and is a regular commentator in the national news. Tony is very passionate about payments and the difference it can make to the lives and the thriving number of jobs, the GDP it creates, and also every consumer. We all touch payments, and it's a real passion of Tony's. Tony shares his knowledge derived from years in payments with real zeal. You'll see this in a moment when we speak. And he speaks and he chairs a number of conferences, including his own conference, which is called Pay 360. And the Payments Association is a fantastic member organisation for businesses that are technology companies in payments, acquirers, across the entire ecosystem. And it's a chance for people to learn, collaborate and network. The organisation itself has 250 plus members. It's across the world. It's really driving change. And there's a lot of change happening in this space at the moment. So I think that maybe that sort of starts with leadership and change. Why do you lead, Tony? What brought you into your leadership journey? What does it mean to you?
So I think leadership is an extraordinary construct that we all have that's shaped slightly differently in our heads as to what leadership is. Is it President Trump? Is it the person who's in charge of this school football team? Is it a community facilitator who brings people together? I think it means different things to different people. I would say, quite honestly, when I first started out, I didn't think of myself as a potential leader, but I think everybody has the potential to be the leader. And I think in the case of our industry, my personal situation, I think I've kind of taken on a leadership role simply because it was needed and because nobody else was. And actually, it's kind of fun as well, and it's rewarding, and it's difficult and it's stretching. And when you do it and it seems to work, then actually it's the most satisfying thing you can do in business, in my experience. But I'm kind of a bit of a reluctant leader in that respect. I kind of feel I've been pushed forward to do something that, I don't think this is just sort of overplaying the British modesty card. Oh my goodness, you can't say I've got a nice suit on, because that would be just too much. I think, genuinely, I think it's true for me.
If you were to look back then and walk us through your leadership journey, where was the moment that it kind of occurred to you, right, okay, I need to step in here and lead? And what drove you to that? Because you say it comes reluctantly to you and it's not maybe as natural, but something still inspired you to do that more than it has somebody else.
So I think for many people, the seeds of their current behaviors are sown many, many years ago. And in my case, I can look back at my teenage years when my father decided he was working in banking, and he came to present to my lower sixth about something that he said was going to be highly influential and world-changing. We sort of were aware of it as school kids, but it wasn't in any of the books and hardly any of the publications. And of course, that was the power of the computer. It wasn't even the internet. It was a computer. It was in the 1970s. And I remember thinking to myself, my word, this man is up there. My dad. And he was shaping the views and attitudes of a whole generation of people at that school. And he did that with several schools. And he actually gave a computer to the school, his company did. And it had about the power of a calculator, and it was about the size of a small shed. It was literally that big, and it was a basic computer. But I think that leadership example to me suggested that at the right time, I could potentially step up to doing that myself. And I actually like talking, I like communicating, I like inspiring people. And when you're in an industry such as payments, quite honestly, there is so much that is inspiring and so much impact we can have. Things are changing so fast that the opportunity to inspire others and lead a little bit is just a great thing to be able to do. There's little leaders and there's big leaders and there's quiet leaders and there's noisy leaders. I mean, communication to me is a fundamental part of it. I spent almost 10 years attending a public speaking club to be able to fine-tune my public speaking skills. So this morning, I can honestly tell you, when I was sitting in hosting the payments breakfast at Mansion House with the Lord Mayor of the City of London, we had 20 of the most influential people in the payments industry talking about stuff that really matters. I was able to stand up and, yes, it wasn't perfect, but at least I knew I was communicating my message with an insightful way because I prepared well. I rehearsed a few times last night. And I also think actually people want leadership. They want to be led. I mean, I haven't heard anybody who's turned around and said, look, Tony, will you please get back in your box? If they did, I'd probably have to listen to them, but nobody says that to me. So I continue to do this because I think people don't mind to be led.
So thinking about your past, proud moments, happy moments, kind of what are the standouts for you? And then where has it gone spectacularly wrong for you and kind of the lessons that you've learned from that?
So great question. The spectacularly right bit, I suppose. So I set up my first business at 29. And I'll never forget the challenge that I had to raise even a few £1,000s. I had to put the deed of my house as security against a £15,000 overdraft facility from Lloyds Bank. And it was a publishing company. We published under contract for people. I was particularly proud at that moment that we actually never needed the overdraft. And 5 years later, I sold out to my business partner, and that was a success. And I've done a few new companies. I think the proud moments, so many. I mean, honestly, I think it is when pretty much every month when we have an employee of the month at the Payments Association, it's being able to see that people who come together, there's about 40 of us, when we come together and we just do the best we can. And I see these young people expanding their abilities, doing the best they can, making a contribution to the rest of the team, and then being recognized by their peers. I feel really proud because as a business person, one of the things I get off on is creating meaningful work experiences for people. And of course they touch their customers, and of course they improve life for their, make money for their shareholders and things. But the point is, they themselves are growing and expanding. So I hope that doesn't sound trite, but genuinely, that's one of the things I really get off on. In terms of failures, Lynda,
I like to say, the lows, the challenges, the things that make you better today rather than the failures.
So then we don't really learn from our successes. We only learn from our failures. There was a particular occasion when I was trying to run a telco. It was a prepaid card telco, which is how I got into the prepaid financial services industry. And I was working with my brother and other people, and I basically had gone out and raised lots of money from my family and friends. What I realized is that, well, I'll tell you what I realized in a moment. What happened was we had great distribution, cards were out there being used, but the IT guy was not legit. He, first of all, wasn't a very good IT guy. And also, I came in one morning and there was a message from British Telecom that said, so you need to transfer £250,000 to settle your account. And I said, what do you mean, settle it? And what had happened is, over the weekend, he had siphoned off £250,000 worth of traffic to his mates, resold them, pocketed the cash, and then we had to find £250,000. We didn't have £250,000. And so we basically had to shut. I had to lay off 35 people. And that was probably the hardest business experience of my life. But again, we learn. I'm not saying I haven't made silly mistakes since then like that, but hopefully less damaging.
It must have really hurt to do that. But, as you say, you learn from everything. Where have you had to dig deep at the Payments Association? Because in this time, I've seen the organisation change beyond recognition. And that's the time in which I've known you, Tony. But in that time, it started from a small seed, and it's now this incredible powerhouse influencing the media, influencing governments around the world, and having an impact on policy. But, there was a journey to get to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give two suggested things. The first thing I had to do, and I think all leaders have to do, is, but most leaders have some personality, they have some preferences and some desires and wants. you have to be prepared to put them to one side if what you're doing isn't quite working. I'll give you a very specific example. One of my peccadillos, my things is, I'm absolutely against bureaucracy and hierarchy and politics. I don't like all that stuff. And I associated the term trade association with all of those things, old school bunch of men in white and grey suits leading businesses and or leading industries. And I thought, I don't want to run a community like that. I know the power of community. I've read about it. I've seen it and experienced it. I want to have a community that really brings energy and creativity and innovation to our industry. Bearing in mind that our industry used to be kind of seen as a bunch of plumbers sorting out the piping in financial services. And now we're really seen as the sexy people at the front end, innovating and leading the way. But to do that, I knew there was a need for a community. So I thought, I'm not going to call our business a trade association. So I called it a commercial community. I called it a network organization. I called it an international facilitation group or something. And it took me about 5 or 6 years to give up on my personal preference, because actually what was needed was a trade association.
And market clarity?
Yeah, and clarity, and to in other words, do something that uses a term that people are comfortable with, and not think that other people think the way I do. So, and that was all about getting closer to our customers. So that's when we launched we changed what we had, which was the GiftX prepay network, into the Emerging Payments Association, which then about 5 years ago became the Payments Association. So that was, you've got to be prepared to give up stuff. I think the other thing on the way that helps is, it really helps if you've got people around you who believe in what you're doing. And I've been just dead lucky. I've had an amazing board of directors. I mean, my wife, Tori, has been a stalwart. She's earned money when I've not been earning money. She's been happy for me to put money into the business from our house, security. And that takes a lot of faith. I think those two things. Be prepared to give up on your sacred cows that are only yours, and then have an amazing network of people around you. It makes leading all that much easier.
I think that's really interesting. It's so inspiring to see the journey that you guys have been on, and I kind of watch and learn from a lot of you when you're on stage and talking. What do you think? So from your experience, and you would have seen so many leaders throughout your years in, we say, fintech or payments or the emerging payments piece. What do you think it takes to be a good leader, specifically in our industry at the moment, with the amount of change that happens?
It's a capacity for risk that is quite unusual. I think about this quite often because, you know what, ironically, if it was, it's not so much if it was easy, everybody could do it, but if it was natural, then everybody would do it. And what it requires is an ability to almost suspend rational judgment, because nobody, looking back at what I put at stake at the very beginning of the first 5 years, nobody in their right mind would have done that. And I wasn't in my right mind. I had some belief in myself. I had a sense that the industry needed this community, and I found payments really exciting. But it's an ability to have a tolerance for risk, and that goes with a tolerance for uncertainty. You know, nobody knows what the future will bring. The past is not a particularly good guide for the future either, I don't think. You've kind of just got to go, you know what, I have some fundamental values and principles. I have a belief that this is going to work. I'll work hard. Yes, of course, hard work is very important. And then just push the pedal to the floor. And if it doesn't work, then change it. And keep on doing it. Keep on pushing the pedal to the floor and change it if it doesn't work. And then when it does work, stick with that. So does that answer your question?
It does. Do you think we've got enough of these types of leadership qualities in our industry?
I don't think there's enough. It's not that the people aren't there. I think they need to give themselves permission to be more bold.
Yeah. We've all traveled to other jurisdictions where, we've generally speaking been one of the strongest regions in the world for payments in the last decade, as you say, and even before then. But now there's a lot of other countries. You look at the Middle East, it's no taxes there. Entrepreneurs are moving there. There's a lot going on with innovation, money pumping into the region. There's Singapore, there's who knows what's going to happen with crypto, and the US with Trump coming in. So, this national payments vision, we've actually got something that's pretty special here. How do you think we need to lead to get cut through?
Great question. And you've summed up the scenario really well. We are in a competitive marketplace for investment capital. And the investment capital will lead to jobs, will lead to innovation, will lead to more jobs and more innovation. there's a virtual cycle. When you look at the competition for money, and you look at the UAE, and you look at the incredible breakthroughs in India and Brazil and the Netherlands in terms of particularly bank-to-bank payments, you think, well, why can't we have that here? And the answer is we can. We just have to take the actions needed to make the tough decisions. And it's interesting because in an ecosystem, you kind of get this sense you need to please all the people all the time. That is our objective. As a community organization, we set out to do that. But there's a point at which either the government or the FCA has to say, you know what, it's not going to work, guys. You come up with a commercial model, but it's not going to work. So we're going to mandate this. And I'll give you an example. So in Brazil, Pix, which is the government-owned infrastructure that enables person-to-person and retailer-to-retail payment, was developed alongside the current infrastructure. So they had faster payments equivalent, but they built a completely new engine, and the central bank in Brazil told all the banks, you are obliged to build the APIs that will enable the movement of money from and between bank accounts very cost effectively. Just told it, said, and you'll do it to these standards by these dates. The banks protested, and they didn't like it, but they did it. And now the wonderful upside of this is the country that used to have 50 million people. 10 years ago, had 50 million people without a bank account. They weren't able to benefit from all the richness that goes with being included in the financial system. Now that number's down to 15 million. And they're correlating it directly to the bringing in of Pix. So by having courage, the central bank was able to enable 35 million people to become part of what society is entitling them to. And that's just an amazing thing to be able to hear. So I want that sort of courage in the UK. I think we've got it. I think we kind of, all a bit polite to each other, but actually at some point we've got to start raising our voices and making demands of each other a bit more.
Bold, and I think we really do need to be bold and have courage for our young people, young talent coming out of schools today to be able to walk into really good knowledge jobs, jobs where they can display their confidence and grow and thrive. And the payments industry is, going to be very important to that. The fintech industry at large, but the whole financial services, the fintech and payments industry is key to that.
Can I add one other little insight?
Yeah.
I've just realised, I was just thinking about this the other day. Nobody knows all the answers, and in fact, in my case, I absolutely don't. And I read a lot. I read a lot of stuff, and I've just read this book. It's called Growth: A Reckoning. It's by Daniel Siskin. And the reason I read that is because the government is all about growth. Good. Nobody quite knows what it is. How are we measuring it? Why? What are the alternatives? And what should we do to unleash it? In fact, there's a chapter in there called Unleashing Growth. So as a result, when I go out now, I tend to speak with a bit more confidence because I've soaked up what Siskin has to say about how you unleash growth. I don't agree with all that he said in there, but I agree with much of it. And so that's the other thing, Lynda, that I do to kind of fuel my own leadership journey is I go and read stuff, partly current affairs related. I might be picking up on what's happening in the US to see whether that's something we can adopt in terms of a mindset over here. And I think we can. I think we've already seen the government say, we've got to get on with this growth thing. And it's said given a remit letter to the regulators saying, how are you unleashing growth? There's been a CEO of one of the regulators who gave a bad response and he was fired. And I mean, this is completely unheard of in the UK. But we're going to do this, and we will do this because, number one, it's needed. The leadership's needed. And number two, because we can, in this country, almost uniquely, we have the talent, we have the ecos, we have the infrastructure, we have the regulator, and we have the ability to co-create and collaborate in a way that is necessary in our extraordinary industry. And again, Angela, you've seen that happen with the working groups we run, the events we facilitate, the conference Pay 360, which is a bringing together, it's a convening of the whole industry from around the world.
Growing together as well. We're talking about the theme of growing. I think growing together, because we're humans need to be in packs. We want to be together and we want to prosper, and all, we get satisfaction from that, doing those things together, just like families do. You know, the right business can be a family, even if it's large, if the culture's right, if the values are right.
I agree with you, and you know what? This is another of my philosophies. It's to do with the importance of community, and it's one of the reasons we chose that business model. It sounds very commercial, but it is. It was consciously the reason why we chose it.
Just for anyone that can't actually see this, Angela's currently dancing around as the lights have gone off in her room. It's quite entertaining.
So I have a belief that, and much evidence confirms this, that people have a need to belong. They need to have a need to belong, and to belong to like-minded other people who share the same day-to-day challenges, who maybe have the same dream, or are happy to buy into the same. People who can, by working together and working differently, can actually make more money, which will reward them for the work they do. And as a result, I think a community such as ours really satisfies a deeply held human need for and belonging. If you go out and you say, I want to run a company that's going to help people belong, you know, you're not going to get many investors in that business plan. But it is underpinning everything that we do as a trade association.
But it's part of a human need. You know, and humanity is so important, which is why so many people gravitate to the Paints Association, but other, you know, important communities that they believe in, and to actually feel like you're making a difference to that community. It makes you feel valued and worthwhile. I think the Paints Association does that and allows people to thrive and companies to, revenues to go up as a result. You know, and profits, and that's obviously what we're all in it for as well. You know, so it's balancing all of those things.
I think that being bold really plays with kind of everything I believe in, trying to take a few risks within reason, you know, make sure that we're on the right path. So I think it's really interesting to see how you've got where you have, and you talked about your dad inspiring you. Are there any other leaders that have inspired you through your life, and why? And I'm really interested to see what's led you here, Tony.
Yeah, well, I'll never forget the first book I read was called Thriving on Chaos.
Sounds like my daily life with 4 kids, to be honest. I won't lie.
Oh dear, he was. I'm trying to remember his name now. It's on the shelf somewhere. So that one for sure. An inspirational leader is, I would say, is Mark Carney, who's the ex-governor of the Bank of England and is now in Canada. I think he's putting himself forward to be the future president of Canada. And I've met him a few times. I've found him affable, approachable, but also able to articulate very complicated things in an accessible way. He wrote a wonderful book after he finished at the Bank of England, and I remember thinking, how do you ever have time to write a book? But it's really brilliantly describes the journey of humanity now and where it will be going in the future. So Mark Carney is the other one I'd put forward. But also a guy called Dick Sawyer. He was a Dutchman, and Dutch are very direct. And I never forget, he said to me one day, he said, well, you have to believe in yourself, Tony. You have to believe in yourself. And don't forget, he said, that the most beautiful flowers grow just over the edge of the cliff. So for you to access them, you have to stand on the edge of the cliff in a scary place. And that's how you can access the most beautiful flowers. So again, Blimey, that was many years ago. So there will be people on your journey. Capture these things, write them down, repeat them to others, tell the story. And that's one of my reasons why I can accommodate a degree of risk, because people like Dick Sawyer, my Dutchman friend, sadly died now, that's how we can.
I've never heard that one. I've never heard that one before, but I absolutely love it, and I'll probably steal it. So you'll hear me in future interviews.
There you go.
On the reverse then, so what about lessons you've learned of how not to do things? Kind of what's the worst form of leadership you've been subject to? And I'm sure we've all got a few comical stories about those. But
I've got one very clear on that one. There's a wonderful book I read on this about power. And the phrase that came from the book was, you never have as much power as when you've given it all away. And what that means is that if we're worried about control, then our sphere of influence will be small. But if we allow so for example, the advisory board, we set up about 10 years ago. Angela's been involved for many years. A bunch of volunteers who come in to shape the industry. About 2 years ago, Neil Harris, the current chair, and I agreed on a slightly different way of working. And I had something that is a product that was, if you like, that I was really held dear. And I said, Neil, look, actually, could you please lead this a bit more yourself? And he took the space that I opened up for him, and he's been a much better chair of the advisory board than I ever could be. So that was enabled partly by this book I read, but also by my current chair, I mentioned David Hunter. He says, be smart, lazy. Don't be smart, hardworking. Be smart, lazy. Because if you're smart and lazy, then you'll always look for the things that other people can do better than you. Angela, you and I used to work together very closely. The people you work with now much more closely at the Payment Association, it's not me, but they're much better than me at doing the things that you need for them as our partner. So do you see what I mean?
I was always told that to hire people better than you, Lynda, and then it'll make your life a lot easier. So that's my aim.
It's like my chief executive. He's a much better, Ben Agnew, he's a much better CEO than I could ever be. I try to be a director general and a CEO. It's hard to do two jobs at the same time. I never did either of them very well. I'd like to think I'm learning how to be a good DG, but the CEO job, Ben is awesome at it. And so why do I need to get involved? And actually, this is another thing. Structurally, set up your life to work. So in our case, we have a board of directors for the company that runs the Payments Association. I founded it. I'm the largest investor in it, but Ben doesn't report to me. He reports to the board. And that degree of accountability and me being moved out of the kind of the hierarchy, first of all, makes for much better decision making, makes for much better ownership, and actually much better accountability.
How do you find that? It's interesting because I work with a lot of smaller businesses that are founder owned and then founder led, obviously founder owned, but founder led. And there always comes a moment in their growth where they need to step away and bring in different people to do different things. It doesn't mean they step away completely, or sometimes it does. But as someone that you talked about earlier in the interview, you invested a lot of personal risk into your businesses as well. How does that feel? So talk us through the mind state or set as you enter those decisions.
I mean, you'd think it could be a little scary. I think a couple of things. You have to learn to trust people. You just have to learn to trust them, and you'll never lead if you can't trust. You have to know who to trust, and you need to verify that they're trustworthy. Of course, that was the Ronald Reagan quote, was trust first and then verify. I think the other thing is, and again, I said to you earlier, I didn't invent much of this stuff. I read a lot. I went on courses. I went on a lovely course for 2 years called The Leadership Coach. And one of the things it taught me to do was try to focus in on the things that I'm uniquely able to do. What am I really, really good at? And what am I really not good at? So I took some psychometric tests. I did some coaching. And actually, I realized that quite a whole heap of the stuff that I was trying to do well, I was just not made to do well, and I probably could do them. Most founders know how to fill the photocopier with paper. They know how to call the IT department when it's not working. They know how to sell. They know how to develop products. They know how to manage finances. I used to do the finances on a spreadsheet. But, we've got to give stuff up that you're not uniquely able to do. So, Lynda, I'd say for that one, it's work out what you're uniquely able to do that you can do better than nobody else, and then get rid of everything else. First of all, your life will be less stressful. You'll be happier. You'll be absolutely in the zone. So that's quite important to know what you're really brilliantly good at.
To actually know of something that you've got blood, sweat and tears into, is you've done it with grace, Tony, I think, and the organisation's really benefited from it. But as you say, you're the major shareholder, so you would have benefited from that. So it was smart as well as, to do that.
So look, what does an entrepreneur do? And I've always had an ambition to be an entrepreneur. What does an entrepreneur do? They create something that is sustainable and non-dependent upon you. So for me to be fulfilling my ambitions as an entrepreneur, I had to create something that did not depend upon me. If for whatever happens, if I have an accident, if I have a bad health, and I'm in my 60s, that's happening to some of my peers at the moment, I know this organization would continue to thrive, satisfy its various stakeholders without me. But a slightly different color, maybe the shirts would be more boring. I don't know. But the point is that I've got a sustainable business.
Finally, is there anything that you wish to promote?
Let me talk about the World Payments Forum. As a trade association, we have chosen to invest in something that we think is absolutely needed. It's essentially the Davos for the payments world. It's called the World Payments Forum. And in September 2025, we'll be launching this. And we have a particularly important theme. We're bringing together stakeholders, institutions, and industry from around the world, from the 15 leading payments countries around the world. Some guests will be there to talk about whether there's a case for creating not just a national payments vision for each country, but a global payments vision where we can look at learning from each other in a collaborative way. We can maybe do open source software. We can maybe share standards. Maybe we can even adopt each other's standards at a country level, not just at a company. Where did that idea come from? Well, one of my team, actually, Emma Benny-Mandel, she's our events director and board member, and she's the inspiration behind that idea. So yeah, that's something that's really exciting. You said what's exciting about what our future's looking like. That's going to be brilliant. Now, for us to do that, we have to be absolutely at the best of our game. We have to absolutely be delivering on our vision and strategy. And we have to also bring a welcome to the world of payments in a way that's never been done before. Heck, isn't that exciting?
So exciting. Wow. Thank you, Tony.
A pleasure. Thank you for your questions.
Starting your own podcast? From concept to production and launch, Sky Parlour Productions can bring your vision to life. Contact info@skyparlour.com today to get started.